This is why every business owner or freelancer should start your own podcast. Podcasts are no longer a niche medium. It is super easy to start a podcast these days, and nowadays, having a podcast actually provides you with a platform for you to connect with your clients and potential audiences in extremely meaningful ways that many other mediums cannot do. A lot of people don't do podcasts because it is very difficult to start, and even if I start my podcast, who is going to watch? Every time I post a video, I only get 200 views, 20 views, or even 1 view. How is the podcast gonna help my personal branding or my business? Having started more than 10 businesses in the course of the last 10 years, I realized one thing in common in all the businesses that I run that are relatively successful, which is that most of the businesses that are relatively successful for myself, the main bulk of clients and revenue comes from this thing called referrals. And referrals is really about building relationships with your clients and potential clients. People only refer you if they trust you and that there is value. And a lot of times, it's not just about client acquisition, which is what a lot of people focus on, but a lot of times, it's also about client retention. How you can continue to build great relationships, have great conversations with your current clients and your current audiences. And a podcast is an amazing way to do that. Here are 10 reasons why you should consider starting a podcast if you are a freelancer or business owner. Number 1, a podcast helps you build this thing called credibility. When you try to talk to someone, ask him or her out over a coffee for a presentation, sometimes the credibility just isn't there. But when you have a podcast, you have a medium, a platform, and you say something, somehow people just respect what you say just a tiny bit more. So if you are a business that services clients, whether you're B2B or B2C, even before you meet the client can kind of get to know, knows your style, and the podcast helps you build that trust. By consistently sharing some tips, some insights and stuff like that, you are able to build credibility with people on the fence considering whether they should hire you or they should engage you. And all this consistent podcast content allows you to open up certain doors to potential collaborations, potential clientele, and even if you don't get any clients with these podcasts, what you will get is connections and knowledge, because you never know when some things, some people, and some friends will come in handy to give you a hand over time, and how you could potentially help them as well. Another reason why podcasts are super cool is because podcasts provide this concept known as evergreen content. A lot of short-form social media posts sort of fade into oblivion after a couple of days, but podcast provides a little bit of a longer shelf life. Sometimes when you're explaining certain concepts or having certain really intimate conversations over a podcast, this material can be easily sent to potential clients or clients as a way of letting them get to know you, your brand, your values, even before they meet you or hire you. So think of it as a library, a repository of knowledge that you're collecting, a playlist that you can easily, sort of like a FAQ or sorts, whether it's tips or stuff that people need to know about you, your personality, your brand. It is all deposited into this nice library known as a podcast, where you can easily send out information without taking too much of your time managing a lot of client meetings and phone calls, because all this information has been deposited into this library known as your podcast. Of course, in order to run a successful business that encourages referrals and word of mouth, you definitely need to spend enough time with your clients over a call, over a Zoom, or over coffee, and just building the relationships. But a podcast just adds another layer to that, especially if you are extremely busy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you should not write a blog or do social media, make TikToks and stuff like that. All those things are extremely important as well, but podcast just adds another layer to your overall content strategy. By having a podcast, it is like clockwork. Every week you go into the studio, every week you set up your camera at home and just go do your podcast, and it becomes sort of like a habit. Whereas when it comes to TikTok, when it comes to writing a blog post, you really need to spend a lot of time to come up with some kind of concept, script, and yes, TikToks, Instagram Reels, all these can be very spontaneous as well. However, having a podcast really just adds another layer to your overall content strategy, and after a while, it really just becomes like clockwork, muscle memory. You go in every week, you do a podcast every week, and it becomes a documentation of your business journey as well. And the best part about podcasts is, remember just now I talked about building genuine connections. One of the best parts about a podcast is that you don't have to do a podcast alone. Unlike a YouTube talking head video, unlike a vlog, unlike some TikTok content, unlike some Instagram content, you can invite guests onto your podcast. Now, remember, it's all about building relationships with your clients or your potential clients, right? And what better medium or what better way is there to get them to share more about themselves, their experiences, and their knowledge with you over a podcast? It's really about building your network, expanding your collaborative opportunities. Even if this person that you invite onto your podcast is not a current client or doesn't become your client, what you have done is just built a genuine connection with somebody who might be in the same industry or share a same interest as you. And do not underestimate the power of a genuine connection. Over the course of building businesses in the past 10 years, so many people that I've made genuine connections with, are not my clients and will never become my clients, have referred people, their friends, to me for my businesses because we had a genuine connection and they share similar values as me, they trust in my work ethic and stuff like that. Never underestimate the power of building genuine connections, and a podcast is merely another platform, a very, very effective platform to do that. Yes, podcasts are indeed getting more and more popular these days. However, podcast is not as prevalent as blogs, as TikTok, as Instagram, as Facebook, as YouTube just yet. So having a podcast gives you a little bit of a, I wouldn't say first mover advantage, but second mover advantage against your competition in similar fields or similar industries, because the inertia to start creating podcast episodes weekly or twice weekly or monthly is quite high. And the fact is, not many people fully understand the benefits of having a podcast as a business owner. So of course, they wouldn't invest the time and effort to go and find out why a podcast would be suitable, why starting a podcast would be great for their business. So if you start your podcast now, you have a little bit of a second mover advantage. You're doing something different from your competitor and people in the same industry, allowing you to stand out a little bit more. A podcast also allows you to activate this very, very strong concept called building a community. Whether the community is a community of people who are made up of your clients, people with similar interests, building a community is extremely important for every single business in this age, because it's no longer about one-to-one selling, it's no longer about blasting emails. These days, successful businesses is all about building community. Community that share the same interests, community that shares the same purpose. Let's just look at some of the very, very successful businesses in today's age. It's always about building a community who shares the same interest or passion about something. And the best part about building a community is no matter what product or service you're selling, you do not have to implement slice sales tactic to sell your product or service, because when you have a community, your product and your service sells itself within a community, assuming that your product and service is good. Think about it. If your product and service is good and people gravitate towards that product or service, don't you think very genuinely, very naturally, they would recommend someone else your product or service and bring them into the community? And podcast really is a platform to activate this secret ingredient known as building a community, because traditional sales tactics like invoking fear, greed, and stuff like that really just don't work as well these days in this current landscape, because people are smart. You cannot just tickle their pain points as easily as what the car salesman or real estate agent could do 20-30 years ago, because now people have access to this thing known as information and data. And your podcast is merely another platform for you to educate your clients with valuable information, adding value to their lives, creating a community, a vibrant community where you don't need to hard sell if your product and service is good. Of course, don't expect your podcast to suddenly blow up and have millions of listeners, but for some reason, if that happens and you suddenly have thousands of listeners, millions of listeners, then you get access to this thing known as brand deals. Brands and other people who also want to promote their products or services might pay you a small advertising fee to be featured on your platform and your podcast. Yes, most podcasts do not grow to a very, very big audience, especially in the first couple of years. However, not having a podcast just locks you out of this opportunity to collaborate and work together with brands, opening up another revenue stream for your business. As a business owner, I'm sure you have heard successful people telling you building a strong personal brand and storytelling is extremely important in business. Now, don't you think that having a podcast provides you with a platform for you to build a personal brand and tell some amazing stories? Of course, your storytelling skills and abilities have to be practiced and honed. However, without a platform, no matter how great your storytelling skills are, nobody is there to listen. Having a podcast as a platform provides you a platform to share with people some behind the scenes information, share with people your journey, almost like an online public journal, if you will, to help make your personal brand more memorable, more relatable, and again, more importantly, to create genuine connections with listeners who might end up becoming your clients or even friends. Now, a lot of people will say, podcasting is so difficult. I'm not a radio DJ, neither am I a host. How am I going to host a podcast and be eloquent, be fluent? Now, this podcasting thing will make you as a business owner, especially if you do not have public speaking experience, very, very uncomfortable. However, don't you think communication is an extremely important skill as a business owner? Whether you are seeking for investor funding or you are onboarding a new client, don't you think learning how to communicate well with potential clients, investors, and friends are extremely important to build genuine connections with people? Having a podcast puts you in this uncomfortable position to be forced to have genuine conversations with people, to be forced to have conversations with people on a camera, which will definitely allow you to gain the skill of having better communication skills to communicate with your clients better, to come up with more compelling pitches when you are presenting your product or service, and most importantly, to come up with a strong personal branding that is confident and not boring. And most importantly, starting a podcast is easier than most people think. You don't need to have high quality cameras or microphones. It is really the content of your podcast and the reason behind why you're starting your podcast that is the most important. You can easily just start a podcast with a cheap microphone that you buy on Amazon or Shopee or Taobao, plug it into your phone, get a simple tripod, and there you have it, an extremely simple podcast setup. Nobody says you need to go into a professional studio to do your podcast. However, some people choose to do so to save time and make it more convenient so that they can free up their time to work on other stuff in their business. So no matter what you do, starting a podcast is extremely straightforward. Either you buy some cheap equipment online and get started, so to help you film, produce, and run your podcast so that you can free up your time to do more other things. But what is most important is you show up and you create that genuine connection with your clients, your potential clients, and your future network and contacts. And frankly speaking, what do you really have to lose? Starting a podcast really just takes a little bit of time. Starting a podcast really just takes a little bit of money to buy some very basic equipment, $100 at most, you know? If you already have a smartphone, $50 to $80 at most to get some basic equipment to get you started and some time to develop the concept of your podcast, there is really nothing to lose. Take this video as your sign and motivation to kickstart a podcast today and consistently do it because it will only get better. Even if only one person watches, 5 people watches, or 10 people listen or watch your podcast, having the ability to build a connection with these 5 people, with these 10 people, beats nothing at all. As you might have figured out from my video, what is really most important is consistency, authenticity, and really building genuine connections with the people that is a part of your community or business. Whether you're a freelancer or business owner, keep in mind that your voice has the power to inspire, to educate, and to connect. No matter how small your audience is, do not underestimate a small but powerful audience because everybody starts somewhere. Take this as a sign to kickstart your podcast journey today. If you have any questions on starting podcasts, please leave your questions in the comments and I will try my best to answer it with another video. My name is JJ. You can check out my podcast at the One Day at a Time podcast and I will see you in the next video. Peace!